In 1993, three engineers started a small company in California. At the time, the tech industry was already moving fast. Personal computers were becoming normal. Software companies were scaling quickly. And every year, the hardware behind it all was getting more advanced. But this company, Nvidia, was barely visible. Most people wouldn't have noticed it at all. It looked like just another startup, trying to survive in a crowded market. Nothing more than that. Back then, video games were starting to grow, but the graphics were still extremely limited. Everything looked simple. Blocky characters, flat environments, very little detail, and almost no realism. Developers were constantly running into one problem. The hardware couldn't keep up. So Nvidia focused on something different. Not general computing, but graphics specifically. They built something called a GPU, a processor designed just for visuals. And at first it worked. Games became smoother, sharper, more realistic. People noticed the difference immediately. But outside of gaming, almost no one cared. In the broader tech world, Nvidia wasn't considered important. The real power players were elsewhere. Intel dominated processors. AMD competed in hardware. Microsoft controlled software. Those companies shaped the direction of computing. Compared to them, Nvidia was small, focused, narrow, easy to overlook. To most investors, it was just a gaming company. And that label stuck for years. Through the late 1990s and early 2000s, Nvidia kept growing. New graphics cards came out regularly, each one more powerful than the last. And slowly, games became more advanced, more detailed worlds, better physics, more realism. But strangely, the attention didn't follow. There was no big hype, no major recognition from the wider tech industry, because gaming still wasn't seen as something serious. It was entertainment, not infrastructure, not something that would reshape the world. At least, that's what people thought at the time. But underneath all of this, something interesting was happening. Nvidia's chips were different. They didn't just handle one task at a time. They could process thousands of calculations simultaneously. This is called parallel processing. And at first, that only mattered for graphics. But eventually, researchers started to notice something unexpected. These chips were extremely efficient for other kinds of computing too. Scientific simulations, data-heavy calculations, large-scale modeling. And slowly, a new possibility started to appear. Artificial intelligence. At the time, though, AI wasn't a big industry yet. It was mostly research, experimental systems, early machine learning models. Nothing mainstream. So the potential stayed hidden in universities and labs. And Nvidia kept building hardware for gaming, without realizing where the real demand would eventually come from. Then things started to shift in the 2010s. Artificial intelligence began to grow much faster. Machine learning models became more advanced. But there was a problem. They required enormous computing power, and traditional processors couldn't keep up. They were too slow, too inefficient. Progress started to hit a wall, not because of ideas, but because of hardware. So researchers tried something different. They started using Nvidia GPUs. And almost immediately they saw a change. Training became faster. Processing became more efficient. Entire systems performed better. The same hardware built for video games was suddenly perfect for artificial intelligence. And that realization changed everything. From that point on, demand began to grow. First in research labs, then in universities, then in large technology companies. Slow at first, but accelerating over time. And eventually, it spread everywhere. But even then, the biggest shift was still ahead. In the 2020s, artificial intelligence exploded into the mainstream. Tools like ChatGPT, image generation systems, automation platforms, AI built into everyday software. Suddenly, every company wanted AI. But AI had one major requirement: computing power, and a lot of it. And that's where Nvidia became essential. Its GPUs were no longer just hardware components. They became the foundation of AI infrastructure. Entire data centers began relying on them. Companies started competing just to secure supply. Because without this hardware, AI systems couldn't scale properly. It wasn't optional anymore. It was necessary. And as demand increased, Nvidia's position changed completely. It was no longer just a hardware company. It had become a core part of modern computing itself, a silent foundation behind almost every major AI system. And its value reflected that shift, not because it suddenly changed direction, but because the world finally caught up to what had already been built. Today, Nvidia stands among the most valuable companies in the world. Its technology powers artificial intelligence systems across industries. It supports cloud computing at massive scale, and it drives the infrastructure behind modern digital systems. But its story isn't really about speed. It's about time. Long periods of being overlooked. Slow, steady development. And technology built years before it was needed. Nvidia was never just a gaming company. It was the foundation of what came next. And in the end, its rise didn't feel sudden at all. It felt inevitable.